Oh yeah, you know things are serious when I'm sitting down. Today's video is going to be all about all of the different Nintendo controversies. This is actually my second time recording this video because there's been a lot of information coming out and a lot of misinformation coming out as well, and I wanted to spend this video talking about most of the main things that are going around at the moment, different rumors, different announcements, different things that are going on. I wanted to cover it all in one video just to get my thoughts out there on all the things going on. So if you enjoyed today's video, definitely make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, all that stuff down below, and consider becoming a ZakPak member. It would really mean a lot to me, and you get cool emotes and all of that fun stuff. And also, just let me know down in the comments what your excitement levels and even your concerns are for the Nintendo Switch 2 at the current moment. This video is obviously going to be very differently structured than most of my typical videos, so I hope you guys don't mind that because we're going to be diving deep into a lot of different websites and such. So without any further ado, let's just get right on into the video. So the first thing I wanted to very quickly touch on, and then, move on from, is the price of the console and the games themselves. We'll dive a little more into game-specific stuff in a little bit. I did want to at least mention this because I did talk about it in last week's video, but I wanted to quickly mention it here. The price of the console being $450 for the base version and $500 for the Mario Kart bundle. I'm honestly not upset with that price. I don't really mind that price. I will talk about certain quotes and things that have come out about those prices later, but on the whole, the prices themselves, I'm not too upset about. The games, on the other hand, is where I have a little more of an issue. The pricing, Nintendo said they're going for a more value-based thing, which, like I said, I'll get into that quote in a little bit, but, they're not really just doing the standard $60 or $70 price tag. The prices are going to be dependent on the game, and I don't really know how to feel about that. I don't really like that, but nothing really we can do. But without any further ado, let's get into one of the kind of controversies. Here we see a tweet from Croc Ocklock, which basically explains some things that I feel like some people need some clarification on, because of the fact that a lot of the main questions that people are having are based around the Switch 1 games, the Switch 2 versions of these games, and their price point. And I feel like this image right here sums it all up quite nicely. So there are going to be certain games like Super Mario Odyssey and Pokemon Scarlet that are going to have free upgrades, and I believe I even saw somewhere that a lot of Switch games are just going to get free updates and they're going to come out in waves. Like, we're not going to have to pay upgrades for every single Switch game. What we are going to see are the next two categories, which are, we have the $9.99 upgrades, which is obviously, about $10 on top of the game's original price, where there are going to be certain improvements with the FPS, frames per second, and the resolution, and there are going to be some light bonuses, like, for example, the Zelda having a, GPS kind of app, mode, and then Metroid Prime 4 getting its little mouse mode. So these are just minor additions that they're adding to these games to give it a $10 boost. And I don't really mind that. It's basically giving the Switch 2 its own exclusive features that the Switch 1 version of the game will not have. And then, of course, we have this other thing, which is $20, where it's going to be, FPS and resolution improvements, just like the previous two, but it's also going to have, basically, DLC. Super Mario Party Jamboree and Kirby and the Forgotten Land are basically getting these expansions added to them, alongside, all the enhancements and stuff, and these are going to be Switch 2 exclusive modes. So you can't get these on the Switch 1, which is why these games, if you're going to buy the pack in store, are going to be $80, or if you just get the DLC, they're going to be $20 additional. And honestly, these prices, I'm not really upset at. I'm not really mad at these prices, mostly because of the fact that I think it's fair. I mean, the $10 for the minor improvement thing can kind of be, just kind of shrugged at, like, I don't know why they're really charging for these little things they're adding. But at the end of the day, If those little things they're adding don't mean much to you, you don't have to get it. And I'm assuming that there will still be improvements in these games without having to pay the extra $10 or $20. You just won't get the extra stuff as well. You won't get the bonuses. You won't get the mouse mode. You won't get, you know, some of the visual enhancements. I'm assuming there will be other visual enhancements that you will get if you buy the enhanced editions. But you'll probably still get some smoother frame rate, some quicker load times, all that stuff. You just won't get as much as you would if you paid for it. Then we have this article here on Lifehacker, which is all about the Nintendo Switch 2 cartridges, because there's a little bit of a controversy that I feel like is a little more understood now, but I still want to point it out for people who don't really understand. So not all Switch cartridges are going to have the games loaded onto them automatically. There are going to be some games where you don't have the full game on the cartridge, you have to download some of it, or in some cases you'll have cartridges that won't have any game data on it, and you just have to download it. Now, there seems to be some misunderstanding about this. People are upset about this because it's like, what's the point of these? Well, firstly, obviously, we had this with the Switch 1. This is really no different than the Switch 1, where the Switch 1 had the empty game cases with the game codes. But with this, basically what they're doing here is they're actually improving it, in my personal opinion, where you put the cartridge in, and yes, it downloads it to the system, but it doesn't tie the game to your account. So, if you wanted to sell the cartridge, if you wanted to give it to someone, if you wanted to do something else with it, you have the freedom, the option to do so. Now, there is the question of how will this work in the long run when the Nintendo Switch 2, you know, eShop and all the downloads no longer work and you can't download these things anymore. So that's a question for the future, but for now, if you want to buy a game but, you know, want the option to trade it off in the future, you're able to do that. This is good for those companies that are probably going to have games that are bigger than the 64GB max size that these, you know, Nintendo Switch carts offer. So it's a really good way for, you know, third-party companies to actually be able to get their games onto an actual cartridge rather than not having any physical option at all. Because there were a lot of companies, you know, for the Nintendo Switch that didn't want to have to spend so much money to get their games onto a, you know, Switch cart with a bigger file size because it was really expensive to do. So this is an option for third-party companies, you know, who maybe don't want to splurge on that 64GB card so that they can have their games out physically on the Nintendo Switch without having to spend the loads of money that I'm sure the 64GB card costs. I know a lot of people, for some reason, thought that this was how Switch 2 carts were going to be for all games. Rest assured, guys, I am 99% certain there will be no Nintendo games that will use this unless it is a game that they had planned digitally anyways and they plan to make it physical. So your next 3D Mario, your next 3D Zelda, the next Luigi's Mansion, the next Splatoon, none of those will have those download-only carts. There will be actual physical cartridges for most mainline Nintendo Switch games, and most third parties, I'm assuming, will use, you know, regular carts as well. In fact, I believe CD Projekt Red even confirmed a game like Cyberpunk 2077 will all be on the cartridge, not any of the download cart stuff. Alright, let's talk about the delays in the pre-orders. As we see here on The Verge, Nintendo delays Switch 2 pre-orders over tariff concerns. Now, I won't talk about this too much because this is something that is changing every single day. This is the main reason I'm re-recording this video, because as of today, the tariffs are being delayed by 90 days in every country except for China. So basically, a lot of the tariff concerns that Nintendo had are actually now not really as big as they were before because the tariffs are being pushed. So all this could change, but basically a lot of people were wondering how this could affect the price of the Nintendo Switch 2. And I was of the camp, you know, what I said in my first original recording was it can go all sorts of ways. It completely depends on the direction that the tariffs are going in, which is what Nintendo said. They wanted to watch the market conditions, they wanted to see what changes and, you know, follow up as, you know, needed and say, okay, this is the direction we're going to go based on where the market's going and based on how, you know, the tariffs are and how the economy is. And given that the tariffs are being paused, I'm assuming that probably within the next few days, we'll hear a new date for Nintendo to have their pre-orders go up in the United States. As well as we can see here on KFox 14, where, Nintendo also stopped their pre-order stuff in Canada as well, which was really freaking weird. My guess is that they stopped it in Canada to prevent people from pre-ordering, people from America pre-ordering in Canada. But the thing is, the Switch 2 console isn't delayed, right? It was just the pre-orders were delayed. So, if pre-orders were going to open up for the United States, let's say 2 weeks after everywhere else, as just an example, then there's really no point of pre-ordering in another country when we are going to get the pre-orders. We're going to get the console the same day. It's just that pre-orders were shifted. So, I never understood that. And I know a lot of people were huffing and puffing about people pre-ordering in the UK, to be shipped to America, and then those orders getting canceled. I mean, it makes sense if those orders were canceled. If you're in the UK, why would you want people from America taking your consoles? Nintendo sent consoles out to these different countries to accommodate for the markets in those countries. So if a bunch of Americans start ordering from, the UK, then there will be less consoles for the UK audience to purchase, which, makes sense why those orders are being canceled. I don't know why that was a really big deal for people, but I digress. Now, these next few points are going to be a little bit on the smaller side. These are just some things that have come out these past couple days. Firstly, from Polygon, saying that the Nintendo Switch 2 will continue the trend of not having achievements. Yes, we got the confirmation that the Nintendo Switch 2 will not have achievements. This is like the smallest of the controversies. I don't even know if I would call this a real controversy because I haven't seen too many people care too much about it. Personally, I would love to see Nintendo adopt some sort of achievement system. Just give something for Nintendo fans to show off how much they play their Nintendo games, how much they've completed their Nintendo games. But honestly, it's not that big of a deal in my opinion. A lot of games have in-game achievements anyways, and a lot of them have used them to, have unlockable things in the game. So honestly, I don't mind achievements not coming around this time. It sucks, of course. Like, I do wish we had them, but in my opinion, on the grand scheme of things, it's not that big of a deal. I mean, like I said, we've had in-game achievements for the longest time. Luigi's Mansion 3, I think, is the best example of, the game having them, and this is like 6 years ago now, so honestly, not that big of a deal. Next up, we're going to look at Nintendo Everything that says Nintendo Switch 2 doesn't have achievements and why there is no eShop music. Now, obviously, we already talked about the achievements, but the eShop music really sent people into a kerfuffle, and this is one of those points where, honestly, I know a lot of people are upset that there's no eShop music and it'll make the eShop experience a little more boring, and honestly, I don't care that much. And the main reason is because, look, right, you're going onto the eShop to buy your games, right, if you're going to get them digitally. How often are we actually in the eShop? More often than not, we're playing our game, we're on our home screen navigating to our games or whatever the case may be. So for me, music to listen to while I'm in the eShop, while it would be nice, isn't something I care about that deeply. I know many people disagree. Maybe this is because like a lot of people who care about this, really love the Wii generation. And, listen, the Wii has its strengths, but the music was never anything particularly that bothered me. And same with like home screen music, again, doesn't bother me. I'm not going to be on the home screen that much. I mean, yes, I do agree we should be able to customize our home screens. That's something I agree on because it helps customize your console to make it truly feel like your own because you are in the home screen quite a bit. But music was never really something I cared that deeply about. Next up, we have an article from Nintendo Life talking about the fact that the Nintendo Switch 2 JoyCons will not have Hall effect sensors in the sticks. Now, this is a point that I feel like can go one of two ways, right? I feel like this isn't a cut and dry thing of the Nintendo Switch 2 JoyCons are going to have the same drift that the Nintendo Switch 1 JoyCons had. I don't think this is that issue at all. Where I think this needs to be looked at is, okay, so there's no Hall effect sticks, which is okay, like that's not the end of the world, but the question is, how did Nintendo address the stick drift? Because obviously, Nintendo had issues with stick drift in Nintendo Switch 1, obviously. There were lawsuits, you know, like class action lawsuits. There were tons of complaints. They had to repair Switch JoyCons for free. Nintendo wants to avoid that because at the end of the day, that's more money that it costs them to do, you know, the court proceedings and the actual repairs and the replacements and all that. It costs Nintendo money. So, given that Nintendo is definitely leaning more into the business mindset of trying to make as much money as possible, which we'll get into that, you know, in a little bit, I think Nintendo will have had a big, you know, mindset of making sure these Joy-Cons got fixed. And I personally think that we will not have as big of a drift issue, and I'm sure that they have been rigorously tested. If we have the same stick drift issue that we had with the Nintendo Switch 1, I'm going to be mind blown, because it was such a big deal with the Switch 1, I would be shocked if they did not address it for the Nintendo Switch 2. Okay, next up we have this article from Insider Gaming, which says Nintendo addresses Nintendo Switch 2 game prices. Now, I'm not going to read the whole article, I'm mostly going to highlight the bit where it says something very crucial. This quote here that I've highlighted is from Bill Trennan, and, you know, this, for context, is relating to someone asking about why Mario Kart World costs $80. So, Bill Trennan says in response, I would say it's less about the strategy of pricing Mario Kart World, it's more just whenever we look at a given game, we just look at what is the experience, what is the content, and what's the value. So this is what I mentioned earlier, where Nintendo is less so just putting their games at $60 and then smaller ones at $50 like they did with the Switch, and now they're looking at the games for how they suppose their proposed value is to the consumer. And I find this a little bit disturbing. Firstly, right, a game's value, which basically is how much you can get out of a game, is completely subjective, in my personal opinion. Right, you can have a game, you know, like for me, Luigi's Mansion. Luigi's Mansion, for me, is a game that I get endless replayability out of. I love the game. I've gotten so much value out of my copy of Luigi's Mansion, but there are people who don't have that experience. There are people who don't care for Luigi's Mansion, who play it once and are done. So value, in that sense, in the sense that Bill Trennan is talking here, is completely subjective. Right, Mario Kart World, for instance, let's take that for example. Yes, there's the value of having all of these characters, there's the value of having the open world, whatever, but is everyone going to utilize this open world? Is everyone going to play every single character? Is that value something that every player is going to be able to take advantage of? And the answer, of course, is no. Not every gamer is the same. So I feel like value here isn't really in discussion. But then you also get the point of, well, you're also valuing your game higher than every other game coming out this generation. Is something like Mario Kart World more valuable than something like The Last of Us, you know, which is this big, highly polished narrative experience that'll take you hours and hours to complete the whole story? Now, of course, I hate comparing apples to oranges because at the end of the day, Nintendo and PlayStation and Steam and all that, they're all different beasts, and I know a lot of people have been comparing the Switch 2 to the Steam Deck and saying, why would you get a Switch 2 when the Steam Deck exists? And it's like, they're completely different machines for completely different audiences that serve completely different purposes, but I digress. It's one of those things where it's like, you're saying your value of the game is higher than basically every other game on the market right now. And especially when we just came off of, what was it, like a year ago, when Rockstar said, you know, or there were some rumblings of GTA 6 potentially costing $100. Putting your game, valuing your game at $80 is opening a whole can of worms to developers all across the gaming space, because this not just impacts Nintendo. This is a whole industry-wide thing where things could be impacted. If companies look at Nintendo charging $80 for their Mario Kart game, I guarantee you there will be other studios watching and seeing, oh, Nintendo's charging $80 for that Mario Kart game, and it's doing really well. I wonder if we can charge $80 for our game, and if that'll impact the sales of our game. So, it's opening up a whole can of worms and setting a precedent that I don't really care for. Look, if your game is valuable, set it at $70. That should be the maximum price. And what about games that are smaller in scale? Let's say there's a new WarioWare game. That's one of Nintendo's smaller franchises, or even if they do another sequel to 1-2 Switch. A game like that, are you going to value it at something like $40 to $30, which I think is more fair for that kind of game? Or is the low end for this generation for you going to be $60? Because I guarantee you, no one is going to buy another version of 1-2 Switch for $60. I'm telling you, it ain't happening. So, this whole value thing is just messy, right? That's why I will recommend, if you are getting a Switch 2, just get the Mario Kart bundle, because it's $500, yes, but that is saving $30 off of Mario Kart World. $30 you'd be saving. That is nearly half off the price of the game. Yes, you're getting the digital edition of it instead of the physical, but honestly, it might be worth it. For nearly half off, it just might be worth it. Okay, enough about the price of the games. Let's go back to the price of the console, because we have this quote from Doug Bowser, which has been making the rounds on the internet, and I have a lot to say about it. Nintendo presidents channeling Xbox One's disastrous launch messaging when defending Switch 2 pricing. Basically, let me find, here's the quote right here. We recognize that there are some people that may not be able to afford the Nintendo Switch 2's price point. That's why we wanted to make the other Switch platforms available, Bowser explained. This quote bugs the heck out of me for a bunch of different reasons. Firstly, the wording of this particular section here where he says, that's why we wanted to make the other Switch platforms available. That wording makes it sound like you're launching two versions of the Switch 2. One that is the expensive one, and one that is the cheaper one, because you're making it sound like there's an alternative. But there's really not an alternative to the Switch 2. It's either you get the new system, or you don't. That's basically the fact of the matter, because at the end of the day, people who have a Switch 1 are probably going to be the people who buy the Switch 2, because the Switch 1 sold ridiculously well. So the way that Bowser is talking about this is as if someone doesn't already have a Switch, which to me makes no sense. You're making a successor to this console. You're making a follow-up. So why would you encourage people to buy the old system still when this new system exists where all your new games that you want to sell well are going to? So that doesn't make sense to me. The other problem I have with this messaging is as simple as this, right? Nintendo consoles have always been about being for everyone. Anyone can get a Nintendo console and be happy. You know, even if there aren't third-party offerings that some of the other consoles have, Nintendo has so many different IPs that there's something there for everyone. You want a little more of a hardcore, gaming experience or something that's a little more involved? The Legend of Zelda games are there for you. If you want some competitive experiences, Smash Brothers, Splatoon, all that stuff is there for you. Want some fun party games? Mario Kart and Mario Party got you covered. 3D platformers? You got 3D Mario. There's something on Nintendo for everybody, and that's always what Nintendo's been about, being a console for everybody. This kind of language, being exclusionary, saying if you can't afford this, you got the Switch 1, it just feels so exclusionary, and it's just being like, you can't afford us? Oh well. Like, I just don't like it. The Nintendo Switch 2 should be for everyone, and honestly, like I said, I don't have a problem with the price. The price isn't even the issue, because lots of consoles like the PS5, the Xbox Series, they do cost more to buy, new at least, So it's like, the price isn't what's bothering me here. It's just the quote from Doug Bowser that just makes it, bleh. It just makes the whole thing bleh when you're really making it sound like an exclusive thing. Oh, you can't afford it? Oh well. So, I don't know. That's just my 2 cents on that. So overall, you guys, that's all I really got to say. Honestly, the Switch 2's launch period, from the announcement to the aftermath to 1 week later, it's been rough. There's been a lot of uncertainty, a lot of confusion, a lot of miscommunication, and a lot of misinformation being thrown around by a lot of different people. That's why I haven't really talked about this formally until now. But look, at the end of the day, I am excited for the Nintendo Switch 2. I am very excited for the Nintendo Switch 2. But to avoid a Wii U situation, Nintendo really has to do some damage control over the next couple weeks. Get us pre-order announcements. Even if we can't pre-order it yet, at least give us a date and confirm the price. If the price goes up, I feel like not a lot of people are going to bite. But if they keep the prices the same, I feel like it'll be enough for people to be like, okay, let us just pre-order this thing and you know, get our pre-orders in. You know, because many people, despite all this controversy, are still excited for the Switch 2. Again, myself included. I'm so excited. I already know I'm going to be getting Mario Kart World. I already know I'm going to be getting Cyberpunk on day one. Both of those on day one. And probably upgrading my Hogwarts Legacy day one. I know I'm going to be doing all of that day one. I already know that as a Nintendo fan. Heck, I'll probably even be playing like Wind Waker and F-Zero and all of that on day one on the GameCube the GameCube NSO app. Like, I'm going to be doing all of that. But if Nintendo want to be successful overall this generation, they're gonna need to win people over because they've left a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths. I mean, literally, their live streams were flooded with drop the prices messages, which is absolutely insane. So I don't know what to think, but hopefully Nintendo has a smooth launch, and hopefully the Nintendo Switch 2 ends up being a success. So I would like to thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I know this is a very different video. I mean, I feel like it was a different video than I usually do. But this was all stuff that needed to be talked about, needed to be addressed, and I'm very glad I got to do so. So thank you guys so much for watching today's video. I really hope you enjoyed. Like, comment, and subscribe. All that stuff down below. Hit that notification bell so you can be notified of when I upload videos. And of course, check out the merch store. There's some pretty cool stuff up on there for you to check out. And until next time, you guys, I will see you all in the next video.